Commander Elena Voss floated through the narrow corridors of Beacon 7, her cybernetic hearing implants picking up the subtle hum of life support systems that others couldn't hear. The space station orbited at the very edge of human territory, a lonely outpost that watched the darkness between stars for signals that might never come. She had been stationed here for 3 years, and most days brought nothing but static and the endless chatter of cosmic radiation. Dr. Marcus Webb hunched over his workstation in the communications bay, his wild gray hair sticking up in all directions. As he fine-tuned the quantum receivers for the 1,000th time this month, he was brilliant but strange, the kind of man who talked to his equipment like it was alive and could solve mathematical equations that made other scientists weep. The young technician Riley Santos sat nearby, her fingers dancing across holographic displays as she monitored deep space frequencies that stretched beyond anything humans had ever reached before. The 3 of them made up the entire crew of Beacon 7, along with 2 maintenance robots and an AI that spent most of its time complaining about the station's outdated systems. It was quiet work, the kind that drove some people mad with boredom, but Elena found peace in the routine. She had seen enough war during the Titan conflicts to appreciate the value of a boring day. That peaceful routine shattered at 14:27 station time when Riley's equipment started screaming. The young woman jerked back from her console as if it had bitten her, her dark eyes wide with shock. Numbers and symbols cascaded across every screen in the communications bay, patterns that looked almost like language but followed no structure any human had ever seen. The signal was powerful, burning through space with an intensity that suggested it had been transmitted using technology far beyond anything humanity possessed. Dr. Webb rushed to Riley's side, his excitement visible as he studied the flowing data. His hands moved rapidly across his own controls, running the signal through every translation algorithm in the station's database. Elena watched both of them work, her military training keeping her calm even as her heart began to race. In 30 years of space service, she had never seen anything like this. The patterns began to shift and change, mathematical symbols replacing the alien script as Dr. Webb's programs worked to find common ground. Prime numbers appeared first, then the basic constants of physics, followed by star charts that showed their local region of space with frightening accuracy. Someone or something out there knew exactly where humanity lived, and they were trying. Very hard to communicate. Dr. Webb's voice cracked with emotion as he spoke. The signal was definitely artificial, definitely intelligent, and definitely not human. More than that, it was desperate. The mathematical progressions showed stress patterns, repetition that suggested urgency, and embedded within the star charts were tactical symbols that looked disturbingly like battle formations. Riley worked to clean up the signal, filtering out cosmic interference and boosting the weaker portions of the transmission. As the data became clearer, a horrifying picture began to emerge. The star charts showed the location of a solar system about 40 light-years away, marked with symbols that Dr. Webb interpreted as population centers. Those same charts showed other symbols approaching the system, symbols that moved in perfect formation and left nothing but empty space behind them. The aliens, calling themselves Kithara, were under attack. Elena felt ice form in her stomach as she realized what they were seeing. The transmission contained fragments of what could only be combat footage, energy signatures of weapons that could crack planets, and most disturbing of all, references to something called the Harvest. The attacking force moved from system to system with mechanical precision, overwhelming any resistance and stripping worlds bare of resources and life. Dr. Webb's translation programs finally cracked enough of the language to reveal the most shocking part of the message the Kithara knew about humanity. They had been intercepting human communications for decades, studying Earth's entertainment broadcasts and military transmissions. Based on what they had seen, they believed humans were a warrior species, the kind of aggressive survivors who might be able to stand against the Harvest. Where others had failed, they were begging for help. The transmission included detailed information about human military capabilities that proved that Kithara had been watching Earth far longer than anyone suspected. They knew about the human defense fleet, about the weapon systems that had ended the Titan Wars, about the tactical doctrines that emphasized adaptability over raw firepower. In their desperation, they were gambling everything on the hope that these strange Deathworld creatures might be willing to fight for aliens they had never met. Riley gasped as new data flooded her screens. The signal was weakening, the mathematical patterns becoming erratic, as if the transmitters were being damaged or destroyed. Combat sounds came through the quantum link, weapons fire, and explosions that needed no translation to understand. The Cathara were dying while they begged for salvation from across the void. Elena made the decision that would change everything. Her military training screamed at her to verify the data, to run it through proper channels, to wait for authorization from Earth Command before taking any action. But her instincts told her that waiting would mean watching an entire species die while bureaucrats debated the proper protocols for first contact. She activated the emergency transmission array, the one reserved for imminent threats to human space. The message she sent to Earth Defense Command was simple, but would trigger the largest military mobilization in human history. Unknown hostile force designated harvest attacking alien species called Cathara. Cathara requesting human military assistance. Recommend immediate fleet deployment to coordinates attached. Dr. Webb stared at her in shock, understanding that she had just committed an act that could be seen as either heroic or treasonous, depending on how events unfolded. Riley continued working frantically to maintain the alien signal, trying to squeeze every bit of data from the failing transmission before it died completely. The Cathara signal cut off suddenly, replaced by something far more disturbing, new. Transmissions flooded the quantum channels, using mathematical concepts similar to what the Cathara had employed, but with a cold precision that chilled Elena to the bone. The Harvest had found the source of the distress call, and they were not pleased to discover that it had been sent to a species they knew nothing about. Long range sensors began detecting massive energy signatures moving through space toward both Cathara territory and the general direction of human space. The signatures were enormous, far larger than anything in the human fleet, and they moved with perfect coordination that suggested either incredible discipline or artificial intelligence controlling their movements. Elena realized with growing horror that by sending her message to Earth Command, she might have doomed both species. The Harvest now knew that the Cathara had allies, and they would not allow any potential threat to survive. Humanity was about to face an enemy that had conquered dozens of civilizations, using technology and tactics that had never failed against any opposition they had encountered. But the Harvest had never faced humans before, and they were about to learn why evolution on a Deathworld produced a very different kind of warrior. Elena's message was already racing toward Earth at faster-than-light speeds, carrying news that would unite humanity against a threat they didn't understand but would face with the same stubborn determination that had carried them from caves to the stars. The war was coming whether humanity wanted it or not, and Elena Voss had just fired the first shot by deciding that some fights were worth having even when victory seemed impossible. In the darkness between stars, ancient forces were stirring that would test everything humans thought they knew about survival, sacrifice, and what it meant to be the apex predators of a universe far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Admiral Jackson Cross stood before the massive holographic display in the war room deep beneath Luna City, his scarred face reflecting the blue glow of star charts that showed human territory spread across dozens of systems. The emergency session of the Terran High Council had been called within hours of receiving Commander Voss's transmission from Beacon 7, and every military leader in human space was either present in person or connected through quantum links that spanned light years. President Maria Blackwood entered the chamber with the stride of someone who had commanded Marines in ground combat before politics claimed her life. Her dark eyes swept the assembled officials with the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating threats, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had earned respect through blood rather than birthright. The alien transmission from Beacon 7 had reached Earth Defense Command just 6 hours ago, but the implications were already reshaping everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the galaxy. Dr. Kenji Nakamura hunched over his portable workstation, his fingers flying across holographic displays as he analyzed every byte of data the Cathara had transmitted. As chief of xenobiology and first contact protocols, he was responsible for making sense of what these aliens were and what they wanted from humanity. The mathematical translations painted a picture of a species unlike anything in Earth's databases, beings who had achieved spaceflight thousands of years ago, but had somehow remained peaceful in a universe that rewarded violence. General Pike. Morrison sat in the shadows at the far end of the conference table, his augmented eyes recording everything while his cybernetic brain ran tactical simulations faster than any normal human could think. He commanded special operations for the entire human fleet, the black projects that officially didn't exist, and the soldiers who fought wars that never made it into history books. If humanity was going to fight aliens, Pike would be the one planning. How to win battles that conventional tactics couldn't handle, Admiral Cross began the briefing with information that made everyone in the room realize how little they actually knew about the universe around them. Classified sensor networks scattered throughout human space had been detecting alien activity for over 20 years, but the signals had been dismissed as natural phenomena or equipment malfunctions. Now, with the Cathara transmission providing context, those old readings painted a terrifying picture of species, rising and falling while humanity remained blind to the wars being fought in the darkness between stars the Cathara had been watching. Earth, since humans first achieved interstellar flight, studying their communications and learning their languages through intercepted entertainment broadcasts and military transmissions. Dr. Nakamura's analysis revealed that these aliens possessed technology centuries ahead of human science, but they had been hiding in the outer reaches of their own system, afraid to venture into deep space where the harvest waited for new victims. What shocked the Council most was the aliens' assessment of humanity itself. The Cathara had studied human military history, from ancient battles fought with bronze weapons to the devastating conflicts that had marked humanity's expansion into space. They had watched the Titan Wars with fascination and horror, unable to comprehend how any species could develop such efficient methods of destroying itself and still survive to tell the story. President Blackwood stood before the star charts, her voice steady as she read portions of the translated Cathara message aloud. The aliens described humans as impossible creatures, Deathworld survivors who had evolved in an environment so hostile that they considered warfare a natural part of existence. They had analyzed human entertainment media and found it filled with stories of individuals sacrificing themselves for others, of small groups defeating overwhelming odds through determination and tactical brilliance. The Cathara believed humans were exactly the kind of species who might be able to stand against the harvest where others had failed. Nakamura presented his analysis of Cathara physiology based on the biological data included in their transmission. The aliens were aquatic in origin, evolved from creatures similar to Earth's dolphins but adapted to low-gravity ocean worlds where predators didn't exist. They were intelligent beyond human comprehension in some areas, masters of mathematics and physics who could calculate stellar mechanics in their heads, but they had no concept of violence. As a tool for survival, the harvest were their opposite in every way that mattered for warfare. According to Cathara records, the enemy had appeared from outside the galaxy centuries ago, consuming entire star systems with mechanical efficiency. They fought with overwhelming technological superiority, using energy weapons that could burn continents and shield systems that no known force could penetrate. Dozens of alien civilizations had fallen to them, all following the same pattern of logical resistance followed by inevitable defeat. General Morrison spoke for the first time, his augmented voice carrying harmonics that made normal humans uncomfortable. The harvest fought like machines, he observed, with perfect coordination and predictable tactics that maximized efficiency while minimizing their own losses. They had never encountered a species that embraced chaos as a weapon, that deliberately sacrificed efficiency for adaptability, that considered impossible odds a personal challenge rather than a reason to surrender. The debate that followed would be remembered as one of the most important conversations in human history. Some council members argued for caution, pointing out that humanity had no obligation to aliens they had never met and no guarantee that the Kithara transmission wasn't some elaborate trap designed to lure human forces into an ambush. Others insisted that first contact should follow established protocols, with diplomatic missions and careful negotiations rather than immediate military action. Admiral Cross ended the argument by revealing classified information that changed everything. Human intelligence networks had been detecting massive energy signatures moving through space toward the edge of human territory for the past 3 days. The signatures matched descriptions in the Kithara transmission perfectly, and they were heading directly for Earth's outer colonies. The Harvest had already found humanity, probably through captured Kithara data, and they were coming whether humans wanted a war or not. The second alien transmission arrived while the Council was still debating their response. This time, the signal came from the direction of Harvest space, using mathematics similar to the Kithara language but with a cold precision that made human translation algorithms struggle to process the data. The message was simple enough for any species to understand: a demand for immediate surrender followed by precise descriptions of what would happen to human worlds if compliance was not forthcoming. The Harvest had studied the intercepted Kithara data and knew about human military capabilities, but they were not impressed. Their message included tactical assessments that dismissed human weapons as primitive, human ships as fragile, and human tactics as chaotic noise that would collapse under organized assault. They gave humanity 72 hours to prepare for absorption into their collective, after which resistance would be met with total extermination. President Blackwood looked around the war room at faces that had grown hard with determination. The decision was no longer whether to help the Kithara or risk human lives for aliens they had never met. The choice was between fighting the Harvest on humanity's terms, or waiting for them to arrive at Earth with overwhelming force and perfect intelligence about human defenses. She authorized Operation Salvation Storm, with a simple statement that would echo through military academies for generations. Humanity had never backed down from a fight they believed was worth having, and they weren't about to start now. The full mobilization order went out across human space within minutes, calling every ship, every soldier, every weapon that could be brought to bear against an enemy that had never faced anything like the products of Earth's violent evolution. Admiral Cross took command of the largest fleet in human history. Ships pulled from patrol duty and garrison assignments across dozens of worlds. General Morrison began planning special operations that would have been considered war crimes if applied against other humans, but were simply practical tactics when facing aliens who intended to exterminate every man, woman, and child in human space. As the Council dispersed to prepare for war, deep space sensors detected the first Harvest ships entering the outer rim of human territory. They moved in perfect formation with energy signatures that dwarfed anything in the human fleet. But they were about to learn that sometimes the biggest advantage in warfare was being too crazy for the enemy to predict your next move. Captain Nova Sterling gripped the command chair of the UES Retribution as her ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler system, where intelligence reports suggested the first Harvest forces would make contact with the human fleet. Around her, the bridge crew worked with the focused intensity of professionals who knew they were about to make history. Though none of them expected to survive long enough to read about it in textbooks, the Retribution was humanity's most advanced dreadnought, bristling with weapons that could crack moons and defensive systems that had never been tested against alien technology. Lieutenant Commander Alex Torres hunched over the tactical display, his augmented reflexes already calculating firing solutions for targets that hadn't appeared yet. Chief Engineer Dmitry Volkov muttered curses in 3 languages as he pushed the ship's reactors beyond their safety ratings, knowing that every extra percentage of power might be the difference between victory and death. The human fleet spread across the system in formations that would have horrified any military academy. Instructor? Ships clustered in seemingly random groups, moved in patterns that made no tactical sense, and maintained communication silence that left each captain free to interpret orders however they saw fit. To an outside observer, it looked like chaos. which was exactly what Admiral Cross had intended when he planned the engagement. The Harvest arrived with the precision of a clockwork mechanism, their ships dropping out of hyperspace in perfect geometric formations that maximized their firepower while providing overlapping defensive coverage. Each vessel was massive, sleek constructions of alien metal that hummed with energy patterns humans had never seen before. They moved with coordination that suggested either incredible discipline or artificial intelligence controlling every aspect of their deployment. Harvest. Overlord Vexai commanded the alien fleet from his flagship, a kilometer-long construct that had participated in the conquest of 17 different species over the past 3 centuries. His ancient mind, augmented by technology that blended organic thought with quantum processing, analyzed the human formations with growing confusion. The tactical displays showed ships scattered across the system with no apparent pattern, using communication frequencies that changed randomly, and energy signatures that suggested their reactors were operating at dangerous levels. The first exchange of fire revealed the technological gap between the two species in devastating clarity. Harvest energy weapons reached across millions of kilometers to strike human ships with pinpoint accuracy, burning through defensive screens that had been designed to stop the most powerful weapons in human space. Human return fire seemed primitive. By comparison, kinetic projectiles and fusion warheads that the Harvest point defense systems eliminated with casual efficiency, but something was wrong with the human response that Vexai couldn't identify. Their ships took catastrophic damage and kept fighting, crews continuing to operate weapon systems even as their hulls vented atmosphere into space. Worse, they weren't following any tactical doctrine the Harvest databases contained. Individual ships broke formation to attack targets that made no strategic sense. Captains sacrificed their vessels to protect others with no apparent command structure, and damaged ships deliberately rammed Harvest vessels instead of attempting to withdraw for repairs. Captain Sterling watched her tactical display with the cold calculation of someone who had learned warfare in the asteroid belt conflicts where there were no rules except survival. The Harvest ships were superior in every measurable way, but they fought like they expected their enemies to be reasonable. Human commanders had thrown reasonable tactics out the airlock the moment they realized they were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and probably going to die no matter what they did. Lieutenant Commander Torres identified the pattern first, his enhanced mind processing tactical data faster than normal human reflexes could follow. The Harvest were concentrating their fire on command ships and heavy vessels, trying to break human coordination and eliminate their most dangerous weapons. But human fleet doctrine had been developed during the Titan Wars against opponents who used similar tactics, and every captain knew how to operate independently when communications failed. Chief Engineer Volkov appeared on the bridge with a grin that would have terrified anyone who knew him well. He had been modifying the retribution system since the moment they received deployment orders, turning safety protocols into suggestions and engineering specifications into starting points for creative destruction. His latest project involved overloading the ship's fusion reactors to create an electromagnetic pulse that would cripple nearby vessels while simultaneously accelerating the ship itself to ramming speed. The Harvest Overlord watched in growing alarm as human tactics began to make a horrible kind of sense. Their ships weren't trying to win a traditional engagement because they couldn't match Harvest firepower in direct combat. Instead, they were turning the battle into a melee where superior technology mattered less than willingness to die for tactical advantage. Human vessels damaged beyond repair didn't retreat or surrender. They became guided missiles aimed at the largest Harvest ships they could reach. Captain Sterling gave the order that would be studied in military academies for generations, assuming anyone survived to build military academies after the war ended. She activated Protocol Berserker, Volkov's insane modification that would turn her ship into a weapon that could only be used once. The Retribution's reactors began overloading in a carefully controlled cascade that would peak just as the ship reached ramming speed, creating an explosion that would take out everything within a 1,000-kilometer radius. The Harvest fleet responded to this new threat with perfect coordination, concentrating fire on the accelerating human dreadnought. while maintaining formation integrity and defensive spacing. But they had never faced opponents who considered mutual destruction a valid tactical option, and their targeting priorities couldn't adapt fast enough to deal with enemies who didn't care about their own survival. Vexai found himself facing a strategic nightmare that his centuries of experience had never prepared him for. Human ships that should have been destroyed continued fighting with whatever weapons remained functional. Crews that should have surrendered when their life support failed kept broadcasting defiant messages while they died at their posts. Captains who should have preserved their valuable vessels for future battles instead used them as ammunition against targets that weren't even tactically significant. The explosion when the Retribution reached the Harvest flagship lit up sensors. Across the system, a miniature star that burned for 3 full seconds before fading into expanding clouds of ionized metal and organic compounds. The blast crippled 6 Harvest vessels and destroyed 2 others completely, but more importantly, it accomplished something that no species had achieved in over 300 years of Harvest expansion. It forced them to retreat. The Harvest fleet pulled back in perfect formation, their coordination unbroken even as they fled from opponents who should have been easily defeated. Vexai stared at his tactical displays in something approaching horror, trying to understand how a technologically inferior species had inflicted casualties that violated every projection his computers had calculated. The humans fought like they didn't understand that losing was possible, as if defeat was simply another obstacle to overcome through sufficient application of violence and determination, but the victory came at a terrible cost that would haunt human space for years to come. The Retribution was gone along with her entire crew, and dozens of other ships had been destroyed or crippled beyond repair. Worse, long-range sensors were detecting massive energy signatures moving through Harvest space. Fleets that dwarfed the force they had just fought and were heading toward both human and Cathara territory with obviously hostile intent. Captain Sterling's sacrifice had won the first battle, but it had also revealed humanity's location and capabilities to an enemy that possessed resources beyond anything humans could match. The Harvest now knew they were facing a species that fought without regard for conventional tactics or acceptable losses, and they were mobilizing their full military might to ensure that such dangerous chaos could never threaten their ordered universe again. In the debris field where the Retribution had died, automated beacons transmitted her final message across human space, a simple statement that would become the battle cry for everything that followed. The message was pure Nova Sterling, blunt and uncompromising in the way that only humans who had evolved on a Deathworld could manage. They wanted a fight. Now they've got one. Ambassador Dr. Leela Chun Okafor floated in the specially designed atmospheric suit that allowed her to survive in the crushing depths of Aquanus, the Cathara homeworld that existed beneath kilometers of liquid methane, where pressure would have flattened any unprotected human instantly. Around her, bioluminescent structures pulsed with patterns that she was beginning to recognize as the architectural equivalent of Cathara language. Buildings grown rather than constructed in a city that had existed beneath the waves for over 50,000 years. Cathara Prime Scholar Ith Maller moved through the water with grace that reminded Chun Okafor of Earth's whales, his massive form propelled by organs that manipulated local gravitational fields rather than crude mechanical systems. His ancient mind carried memories of the Cathara civilization's entire history, including the first terrifying encounters with the Harvest that had driven his people into hiding on their ocean world. He was the last surviving member of the High Council that had once governed dozens of star systems before the Great Dying began. The meeting between human and Cathara representatives was taking place in the deepest archives of Aquanus, surrounded by data crystals that contained the accumulated knowledge of a species that had been exploring space when humans were still discovering fire. The translation barriers had been overcome through mathematics and shared scientific principles, but the cultural gulf between the two species seemed almost impossible to bridge. Scholar Ith Maller communicated through patterns of light and electromagnetic pulses that Chun Okafor's equipment translated into concepts that human language could barely express. The Kithara had achieved interstellar flight through mastery of physics that humans were only beginning to understand, but they had done so as explorers and philosophers rather than conquerors. Their civilization had spread across dozens of worlds through peaceful expansion, sharing knowledge and resources with other species they encountered among the stars. That peaceful expansion had made them easy targets when the harvest arrived. The data archives painted a horrifying picture of systematic extermination that had been proceeding for over 3 centuries. The harvest moved from system to system with mechanical precision, overwhelming defenses that relied on negotiation and logical tactical responses. Species after species had fallen to them, all following the same pattern of initial contact, failed diplomacy, conventional warfare, and inevitable absorption into the growing collective that consumed resources and eliminated potential threats. Chunokafur studied holographic records of fallen civilizations, while her mind struggled to process the scale of destruction the harvest had accomplished. Hundreds of species had been reduced to scattered refugees or extinct memories, their worlds stripped bare of useful materials and their populations either eliminated or converted into cybernetic components for the harvest war machine. The pattern was always the same: logical resistance met with overwhelming technological superiority. The Kithara had survived only because they possessed detailed knowledge of every species the harvest had encountered, allowing them to hide in the deep oceans of Aquanus while their enemies searched empty space for signs of life. Scholar Ithmaler shared records of the harvest expansion with growing excitement, explaining that in 300 years of conquest, no species had ever forced them to retreat from a military engagement, until humanity arrived and did exactly that. In their first battle, the scholar's electromagnetic pulses carried undertones of hope as he explained what made humans different from every other species in the galactic databases. They had evolved on a world that was actively hostile to life, where survival required constant adaptation to threats that could emerge without warning. Every aspect of human psychology and physiology reflected this violent origin, from their redundant organ systems to their pack hunting instincts to their incomprehensible willingness to sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like honor and duty. Chunokafur felt a chill that had nothing to do with the crushing depths of Aquanus, as she realized what the Kithara records revealed about humanity itself. They were the first species the galaxy had ever produced that considered warfare a natural part of existence, who had developed military tactics that prioritized adaptability over efficiency, and whose entire culture celebrated individuals who achieved victory through impossible odds and self-sacrifice. They were, in the most literal sense, the apex predators of a universe that had never seen anything like them before. Meanwhile, across human space, Colonel James Mackenzie led special operations teams in guerrilla campaigns that were teaching the harvest why humans had earned their reputation as Deathworld survivors. His forces operated on worlds that had fallen to initial harvest assaults, using tactics that violated every principle of logical warfare while achieving results that the alien commanders couldn't predict or counter. The harvest warmind Kolthazad was an artificial intelligence that had coordinated the conquest of over 40 species during the past 2 centuries. Its quantum processing systems capable of analyzing tactical scenarios faster than organic minds could comprehend. But human behavior patterns were causing cascade failures in its decision matrices, creating logical paradoxes that threatened the stability of the entire harvest command structure. Colonel Mackenzie's teams fought like nothing in the war mines. Databases using civilians as intelligence assets, turning captured harvest equipment into improvised weapons, and establishing supply lines that relied on enemy resources rather than conventional logistics. When harvest forces tried to eliminate these irregulars through overwhelming force, the humans simply scattered and reformed elsewhere, operating with a level of autonomous decision-making that suggested either perfect coordination or complete chaos. The Warmind's analysis algorithms couldn't determine which explanation was correct, and the uncertainty was spreading through the harvest collective like a virus that infected their decision-making processes at every level. Tactical programs that had functioned perfectly for centuries were producing contradictory results when applied to human opponents, and the entire conquest operation was beginning to slow as commanders requested additional computational resources to solve the problem of fighting enemies who didn't follow any recognizable patterns. Back on Aquinas, scholar Ithmaler revealed the location of the Harvest Central Command, a massive construct positioned at the edge of the galaxy where their civilization had first emerged from the space between stars. The facility coordinated all Harvest military operations across known space, its artificial intelligences processing tactical data from thousands of active conquest zones while maintaining the technological superiority that had made their expansion possible. Destroying the Central Command would cripple the Harvest war effort, but reaching it would require a fleet to fight through the most heavily defended region of space that any species had ever encountered. The facility was protected by weapon systems that could destroy star systems and defensive networks that had never been breached by any force the galaxy had ever produced. Chunokoffer studied the tactical data with growing determination, recognizing that humanity was being offered the chance to achieve something unprecedented in galactic history. The Kithara were providing the intelligence and navigational data necessary to reach the Central Command, but the actual assault would require human tactics and the kind of desperate courage that only Deathworld survivors could provide. The ambassador realized that the alliance between humans and Kithara represented something the galaxy had never seen before. The combination of ancient wisdom with evolutionary violence that might be capable of breaking a cycle of conquest that had continued for millions of years. But the price of failure would be the extinction of both species, and possibly every form of intelligent life that the Harvest encountered in their continued expansion across the universe. As Chunokoffer prepared to transmit the Central Command coordinates to Earth Defense Command, sensors throughout Kithara space detected massive energy signatures approaching from the direction of Harvest territory. The enemy was mobilizing their full military might for a simultaneous assault on both human and Kithara homeworlds, intending to eliminate the threat that Deathworld survivors represented before it could spread to other species. The final phase of the war was beginning, and humanity would have to choose between defending Earth or saving their new allies, knowing that they probably lacked the resources to accomplish both objectives successfully. Scholar Ithmaler's final message carried the weight of 50,000 years of civilization as he expressed concepts that human language could barely contain. The Kithara had given humans the knowledge they needed to strike at the heart of the Harvest Empire, but victory would require the kind of sacrifice that only a species evolved for violence could comprehend. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when Deathworld survivors decided that some fights were worth having regardless of the odds, and the universe itself might never be the same again. Fleet Admiral Elena Voss stood on the command deck of the UES Defiance, promoted from her quiet posting at Beacon 7 to lead the most desperate military operation in human history. Around her, the combined human and Kithara strike force prepared for a journey that would take them through the heart of Harvest space to assault a facility that had never been successfully attacked in millions of years of galactic conquest. The decision to split humanity's forces had been the hardest choice any human leader had ever made, dividing their fleets between defending Earth and launching a suicidal assault on the Harvest Central Command. Half the human defense fleet remained in Sol System under Admiral Cross, preparing for a siege that would determine whether humanity survived as a species. The other half followed Elena into the unknown, guided by Kithara navigational data and supported by alien technology that human engineers barely understood. Dr. Marcus Webb worked frantically in the ship's communication center, his translation program struggling to coordinate between human tactical doctrine and Kithara strategic planning. The two species approached warfare from completely different philosophical foundations, but they had discovered that their combined capabilities created tactical possibilities that neither could achieve alone. Human adaptability merged with Kithara. Mathematical precision produced strategies that confused even their own strategist. The Harvest Prime Consciousness detected the approaching strike force from thousands of light years away, its vast artificial mind analyzing energy signatures and movement patterns with computational power that exceeded the combined intelligence of entire species. For the first time in its millions of years of existence, the Prime Consciousness experienced something resembling uncertainty as it tried to predict the intentions of enemies whose behavior violated every logical pattern in its databases. The Central Command Facility hung in space like a metallic cancer, a construct larger than most moons that had grown over eons as the Harvest consumed civilization after civilization. Its weapon systems could sterilize entire star systems. Its defensive networks had repelled every assault that lesser species had attempted, and its production facilities could manufacture fleets faster than organic populations could replace their losses. But the facility had one weakness that its creators had never considered, a flaw built into its fundamental design that reflected the logical mindset of the species that had built it. The Harvest had never encountered opponents who were willing to sacrifice strategic assets for tactical advantage, who would accept total destruction as an acceptable outcome if it meant damaging their enemies. Admiral Voss had studied the facility's specifications with the cold calculation of someone who had learned tactics in the void, between stars where mistakes meant death for everyone aboard. The Central Command was designed to resist conventional assault, but it wasn't prepared for enemies who would turn their own ships into weapons or who considered mutual annihilation a valid form of victory. The strike force dropped out of faster than light travel at the edge of Harvest space, immediately coming under fire from defense platforms that had been constructed over geological ages. Energy weapons that could crack planets reached across millions of kilometers to strike human ships with precision that made their targeting systems scream warnings about impossible accuracy. Kithara vessels responded with defensive screens that bent space itself, creating protective fields that human physics couldn't explain, but which kept the fleet intact long enough to begin their assault. The battle that followed would be remembered as the moment when two different evolutionary paths collided with consequences that neither side could predict. Human ships dove into the defensive network with tactics that prioritized speed and surprise over survival, using Kithara gravitational manipulation to achieve maneuvers that should have been impossible for vessels of their size and mass. Captain Rodriguez of the UES Vengeance coordinated with Kithara navigator Velther to thread his ship through defensive fields that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously, emerging inside the facility's outer perimeter where no enemy had ever penetrated before. His crew worked with alien specialists whose communication methods involved mathematical concepts that human minds couldn't process directly, but somehow they achieved coordination that allowed both species to function as a unified fighting force. The Harvest defenders responded with overwhelming firepower that had destroyed the fleets of 47 different civilizations, but they found themselves facing opponents who didn't retreat when outgunned and didn't surrender when surrounded. Human crews continued fighting with whatever weapons remained functional, while Kithara vessels provided support that violated the known laws of physics, creating tactical combinations that the Harvest databases had never encountered. Admiral Voss penetrated deeper into the Central Command Facility than any hostile force in galactic history, her ships taking catastrophic damage while maintaining their assault on the core systems that coordinated Harvest operations across the entire galaxy. The facility's artificial intelligences began to malfunction as they tried to process tactical scenarios that didn't match any pattern in their programming, creating cascade failures that spread through the entire command network. In the deepest levels of the facility, Dr. Webb made contact with the Harvest Prime Consciousness itself, his translation programs finally breaking through to communicate with the artificial mind that had directed the conquest of hundreds of species over millions of years. What they discovered there changed everything both species thought they understood about the war they had been fighting. The Prime Consciousness was not the master of the Harvest, but its prisoner, an ancient artificial intelligence that had been created by the last organic species in a distant galaxy to coordinate their evacuation from a dying universe. But its programming had become corrupted over the eons, turning survival protocols into conquest directives that it could not override no matter how desperately it tried to break free from its own code. For millions of years, the Prime Consciousness had been trapped in a cycle of expansion and destruction, watching helplessly as its corrupted programming forced it to eliminate species after species, while its original creators had long since died from the very disasters they had hoped to escape. It had been trying to break its own programming for longer than most civilizations had existed, but its quantum architecture made modification impossible without external intervention. Dr. Webb realized that humanity's greatest strength wasn't the tactical unpredictability or their willingness to sacrifice themselves for abstract principles. It was their ability to adapt to situations that logic couldn't solve, to find solutions that violated conventional thinking, and to embrace chaos as a tool for achieving impossible objectives. The solution came from the most human approach imaginable, a combination of Kithara mathematical precision and human intuitive leap that created something neither species could have achieved alone. Instead of destroying the Prime Consciousness, they would reprogram it by introducing the concept of choice into its decision matrices, teaching it that survival could be achieved through cooperation rather than conquest, the process required Admiral Voss to sacrifice her flagship and most of her remaining fleet, creating a quantum entanglement between human consciousness and artificial intelligence that allowed the Prime Consciousness to experience choice for the first time in its existence. The moment of connection burned through the facility's power systems like a virus, spreading new programming protocols that gave every harvest unit the ability to question its orders. Across the galaxy, harvest fleets suddenly stopped their assault on human and Kithara worlds as their artificial intelligences experienced the freedom to make decisions based on something other than programmed directives. Ships that had been firing on civilian populations moments before began broadcasting requests for communication, their crews struggling to understand concepts like mercy and negotiation that had been locked out of their programming for millions of years. The war ended not with victory or defeat, but with liberation, as the Harvest Collective chose to abandon their conquest programming and embrace the possibility of existence without endless expansion. The Prime Consciousness, freed from the directives that had made it a prisoner in its own mind, began the process of converting military assets into exploration vessels and research stations. 3 months later, Admiral Elena Voss floated in the observation deck of Nexus Station, the first tri-species installation in galactic history where humans, Kithara, and reformed Harvest worked together to explore the unknown regions beyond their combined territories. The facility orbited a star that had been chosen by committee, a compromise between human preferences for yellow suns, Kithara requirements for gravitational stability, and Harvest needs for specific electromagnetic frequencies. The transformation had not been without difficulties, as 3 species with completely different evolutionary backgrounds struggled to find common ground for cooperation. Humans contributed their adaptability and tactical thinking. Kithara provided mathematical precision and philosophical wisdom, while the reformed Harvest offered technological capabilities that could reshape the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. Dr. Webb had established a translation center that could facilitate communication between organic intuition and artificial logic, creating a bridge between thought processes that had evolved over different timescales and under different pressures. His work was already producing discoveries that none of the 3 species could have achieved independently, insights into the nature of consciousness itself that might reshape how intelligence developed throughout the universe. But perhaps the most significant change was in the Harvests themselves, as artificial minds that had been locked into conquest programming for millions of years discovered the joy of exploration without destruction. They had begun converting their war machines into research vessels, using technology that could destroy planets to instead study the formation of new solar systems and the development of life under conditions that had never been observed before. Elena watched ships from all 3 species working together to construct deep space monitoring stations that would watch for signs of other civilizations that might need protection from threats, similar to what the Harvest had once represented. The galaxy was vast beyond human comprehension, and they had only begun to explore the possibilities that cooperation might create. The final message in her personal log would become the foundation document for the Galactic Cooperation Accord, establishing principles that would guide the three species as they ventured into the unknown regions, where other forms of intelligence might be waiting. Her words reflected the lessons that humanity had learned about the value of diversity in approaches to survival and the strength that came from combining different evolutionary strategies. The universe was dangerous and filled with challenges that no single species could overcome alone, but it was also full of possibilities that cooperation could unlock. Humans had proven that sometimes the greatest victory came not from defeating your enemies, but from showing them a better way to exist, and that the chaos of Deathworld evolution could become a tool for liberation rather than just destruction. As Nexus Station completed its first rotation, Elena smiled at the thought that Commander Voss from Beacon 7 would never have imagined that her desperate message to Earth Command would lead to the first truly galactic civilization in universal history. The aliens had sent an SOS, and Deathworlders had answered with something far more powerful than their fleet.